The early days of June 2025 brought news that sent ripples across an already tense global stage. Ukraine launched a significant drone assault against Russian territory. This was not a minor skirmish. Reports indicated that this operation involved a large number of unmanned aerial vehicles, possibly over 100. These drones targeted strategic locations deep within Russia, challenging Moscow's formidable air defense systems. The scale of this attack was described by some sources as the largest such drone offensive in the now 3-year-long conflict. It marked a new phase of audacity and technological capability in Ukraine's defense efforts, demonstrating a resolve to strike back with significant force. The world watched, holding its breath, wondering what the implications of this bold move would be. The targets of this extensive drone operation were reportedly military airfields. News emerged that several Russian military aircraft were damaged or destroyed. Among these were said to be strategic bombers, such as the Tu-95 and Tu-22 models, crucial assets in Russia's long-range strike capabilities. The destruction of such valuable military hardware represents a substantial blow. Some accounts suggested that over 40 aircraft might have been impacted by the Ukrainian drones. This single operation, meticulously planned and executed, aimed to degrade Russia's ability to conduct air operations, showcasing Ukraine's growing sophistication in asymmetric warfare tactics. The psychological impact on both sides and on international observers was immediate and profound. What made this drone strike particularly noteworthy was its reach. Some of the targeted airfields, like the Belaya airbase in Irkutsk, were situated thousands of kilometers away from Ukrainian-controlled territory. This incredible range suggested a high level of planning and logistical execution. Reports indicated that these drones might have been pre-positioned, perhaps smuggled in parts and assembled closer to their targets or launched from clandestine locations. The ability to bypass extensive Russian radar and anti-aircraft systems to hit such distant targets underscored a significant intelligence and operational success for Ukraine. It also raised uncomfortable questions for Russia about the security of its own airspace and critical infrastructure. The planning for this ambitious operation was apparently a long-term endeavor. Newsweek reported that this specific long-range strike had been in the works for over 18 months. Furthermore, it was stated that the operation was overseen directly by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This level of presidential involvement highlights the strategic importance attributed to the mission. It was not merely a tactical decision made by field commanders, but a strategic gambit at the highest level of Ukrainian leadership. This direct oversight signals Ukraine's commitment to leveraging all available means to counter the ongoing invasion and to shift the dynamics of the conflict, even if it means taking significant risks. Such a significant escalation, like Ukraine's far-reaching drone strike, naturally fuels fears of a broader conflict. When one nation strikes deep into the territory of another, especially a major power like Russia, the potential for miscalculation and rapid escalation increases dramatically. Each action can provoke a reaction, leading to a dangerous spiral. Russia, in response to this drone assault, predictably launched its own massive aerial attack on Ukraine, deploying hundreds of drones and missiles. This retaliatory strike, which reportedly caused casualties at a Ukrainian army training facility, demonstrates the immediate tit-for-tat nature of modern warfare. The cycle of attack and counterattack pushes both sides further down a perilous path. The concern is that such regional conflicts, especially those involving nations with global influence and alliances, can draw in other powers. The current war in Ukraine already has deep international involvement, with NATO countries providing substantial military and financial aid to Ukraine. Russia, on the other hand, has its own allies and partners. If the conflict intensifies, or if one side perceives a truly existential threat, the temptation to involve allies more directly could become overwhelming. This is how regional wars have historically metastasized into global conflagrations. The shadow of World War III looms larger when such direct and damaging attacks occur, shaking the fragile sense of containment. The very definition of warfare, is changing. The use of sophisticated drones, cyber attacks, and information warfare blurs the lines between combatants and civilians, and between domestic and international fronts. An attack on critical infrastructure, whether military airfields or energy grids, can have far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate battlefield. If such attacks were to spread, or if critical infrastructure in allied nations were to be targeted, directly or indirectly, the pressure for a more robust collective response would mount. The interconnectivity of the modern world means that a significant disruption in one region can have cascading effects globally, pulling more actors into the vortex. The rhetoric from leaders also plays a crucial role in this escalation dynamic. Strong condemnations, threats of severe repercussions, and the mobilization of public opinion can create an environment where de-escalation becomes politically difficult. When national pride and security are perceived to be at stake, leaders may feel compelled to adopt increasingly hardline stances. The drone strike, while a tactical success for Ukraine, also presents a significant challenge to Russia's image and authority. How President Putin chooses to respond beyond immediate military retaliation will be closely watched. The fear is that a desperate or cornered power might resort to even more drastic measures, potentially crossing red lines that could trigger a wider, more devastating war. Throughout human history, major conflicts have consistently cast a long and often dark shadow over global financial systems. Wars are enormously expensive undertakings. They divert vast resources from productive economic activities towards destruction and defense. Governments finance wars through increased taxation, borrowing, or printing money, all of which can have profound impacts on economies. Inflation often follows, as more money chases fewer goods, and public debt can soar to unprecedented levels, burdening future generations. The uncertainty created by war also makes businesses and individuals hesitant to invest and spend, leading to economic slowdowns or recessions. This pattern has repeated itself countless times. The First and Second World Wars, for example, reshaped the global financial order. They led to the collapse of empires, the redrawing of economic maps, and the rise of new financial powers. The Bretton Woods system, established after World War II, was a direct attempt to create a more stable international financial framework to prevent the kind of economic turmoil that contributed to the wars. However, even this system eventually broke down. Wars disrupt trade routes, destroy infrastructure, and displace populations, all of which are anathema to smooth economic functioning. The interconnectedness of modern global finance means that a significant conflict today could have even more rapid and widespread repercussions than in the past. In times of war, capital tends to flee from perceived risk. Investors seek safe havens for their assets, trying to preserve wealth amidst the chaos. Traditionally, this has meant moving money into assets like gold, or the currencies of nations perceived to be more stable or geographically distant from the conflict. Stock markets often become highly volatile, reacting nervously to every piece of news from the front lines. The value of currencies of warring nations typically depreciates due to economic strain and the risk of defeat. The current conflict in Ukraine has already demonstrated these effects with impacts on energy prices, food security, and global supply chains, leading to inflationary pressures worldwide. The fear of a wider conflict, such as a potential World War III, amplifies these financial anxieties to an extreme degree. Such a scenario would likely involve multiple major economies, leading to a catastrophic disruption of global trade, production, and financial markets. The very systems that underpin global commerce, international payment systems, shipping routes, internet connectivity, could be severely compromised. In such an extreme situation, the concept of a safe haven itself might be redefined, as traditional financial institutions and even nation-states could face existential threats. The search for alternative stores of value and means of exchange becomes more urgent under such dire circumstances. In this landscape of geopolitical uncertainty and financial anxiety, Bitcoin has emerged as a fascinating if controversial asset. Proponents often describe Bitcoin as a form of digital gold. They argue that, like physical gold, it can act as a hedge against inflation and systemic instability. Bitcoin's supply is finite, capped at 21 million coins, a characteristic that contrasts sharply with national currencies, which central banks can print in unlimited quantities. This scarcity, its advocates believe, makes Bitcoin a robust store of value, particularly when faith in traditional fiat currencies wanes due to government debt, money printing, or the economic devastation of war. The decentralized nature of Bitcoin is another key aspect of its appeal during crises. Unlike traditional financial systems which rely on banks and governments, Bitcoin operates on a distributed ledger technology called blockchain. This means it is not controlled by any single entity or authority. In theory, this makes it resistant to censorship or seizure by governments. For individuals living in regions experiencing conflict, political instability, or hyperinflation, Bitcoin could offer a way to preserve and transfer wealth when traditional banking systems fail or become untrustworthy. It can be accessed from anywhere with an internet connection, offering a degree of financial sovereignty. The narrative of Bitcoin as a safe haven asset often gains traction during periods of heightened geopolitical tension. When news of events like the Ukrainian drone strike hits the headlines, or when fears of wider conflict escalate, some investors may turn to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. They might see it as a way to diversify their portfolios away from assets tied to specific nations or traditional financial markets. The idea is that Bitcoin, being global and ostensibly apolitical, might be less affected by the turmoil plaguing particular countries or regions. This perception can drive short-term demand and influence its price. However, the concept of Bitcoin as a perfect digital arc is not without its critics and complexities. While it offers certain advantages, it also comes with its own set of risks, especially in extreme crisis scenarios. Its price is notoriously volatile, and its regulatory status varies significantly across jurisdictions. Furthermore, its reliance on internet infrastructure and electricity means that in a widespread conflict that disrupts these essential services, accessing and using Bitcoin could become difficult, if not impossible. So, while it presents an intriguing alternative, its role as a true safe haven, especially in the context of a major global war, remains a subject of intense debate and observation. Section 5. Market Tremors. Bitcoin's immediate dance with geopolitics. When significant geopolitical events unfold, such as the recent Ukrainian drone offensive, financial markets often react with a degree of nervousness, and Bitcoin is no exception. In the immediate aftermath of such news, we often see increased volatility in Bitcoin's price. Some investors, driven by the safe haven narrative, might rush to buy Bitcoin, anticipating that broader instability will drive more people away from traditional assets and towards decentralized alternatives. This surge in demand, even if temporary, can lead to a noticeable uptick in Bitcoin's price. It reflects a flight to what is perceived as a less correlated asset, or one that might thrive amidst chaos. Conversely, other market participants might react with caution, leading to selling pressure. Large-scale conflicts introduce a high degree of uncertainty, and in such times many investors prefer to move into cash or the most stable traditional safe havens like U.S. Treasury bonds or gold. Bitcoin, despite its digital gold moniker, is still considered a relatively new and speculative asset class by many mainstream investors. Its historical performance during a truly global, prolonged conflict is untested. Therefore, a major escalation could also trigger a risk-off sentiment, where investors sell assets perceived as higher risk, including cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, leading to price declines. The initial price movements of Bitcoin in response to geopolitical shocks are therefore often a tug-of-war between these two competing narratives. Is it a refuge from the storm, or is it a risky asset to be shed when uncertainty peaks? The answer can depend on the specific nature of the crisis, the prevailing market sentiment, and the actions of large institutional players. News from Newsweek suggested that such geopolitical shocks could indeed drive Bitcoin's price higher in the short term, as investors reconsider risks in traditional markets. This indicates that the hedge against instability argument currently holds sway for a significant portion of the crypto market. However, it's crucial to remember that these short-term reactions can be fleeting and driven by speculation as much as by fundamental shifts in asset allocation. The market is trying to price in a highly uncertain future. The news of the drone strike, followed by Russia's retaliation, creates a complex information environment. Traders and algorithms react to headlines in milliseconds. Therefore, while a short-term price rally might occur, it doesn't necessarily guarantee a sustained upward trend. The true test for Bitcoin would come if the conflict were to escalate significantly further, moving beyond regional skirmishes to a more systemic global crisis. Section 6. The long shadow, Bitcoin's fate in protracted warfare. If the current geopolitical tensions were to escalate into a prolonged, widespread conflict, perhaps even a scenario resembling a World War III, The implications for Bitcoin could be far more complex and potentially negative than any short-term speculative rally. While Bitcoin's decentralized nature is often touted as a strength, its operational infrastructure still relies on the existing global internet and electricity grids. A major global war would undoubtedly threaten these fundamental services. Widespread power outages, severed internet cables, or cyber attacks targeting critical digital infrastructure could severely impair the functioning of the Bitcoin network, making transactions slow, expensive, or even impossible in affected regions. Furthermore, in a World War III scenario, the priorities of governments and populations would shift dramatically. The focus would be on survival, security, and basic necessities. Investor confidence across all asset classes, including cryptocurrencies, could plummet. If global economic activity grinds to a halt and financial systems face collapse, liquidity in markets, including Bitcoin, could dry up. People might rush to convert any assets they can into tangible goods, essential supplies, or the currencies of nations perceived to be most secure, if any such nations remain. Panic selling could dominate, leading to sharp and sustained price crashes for assets like Bitcoin, which, despite its ideals, still requires a functioning market to determine its value. The regulatory landscape for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies could also change drastically during a major global conflict. Governments might impose strict capital controls or even ban cryptocurrencies if they are perceived to undermine national security, facilitate illicit activities, or enable capital flight when resources are desperately needed for war efforts. While Bitcoin is designed to be censorship-resistant, governments still wield considerable power to regulate exchanges, on-ramps, and off-ramps between crypto and fiat currencies. In a world at war, the tolerance for unregulated financial channels might diminish significantly, as states assert greater control over all aspects of the economy. The Newsweek analysis itself highlighted this potential downside, suggesting that prolonged warfare could destabilize infrastructure and investor confidence, potentially leading to sharp sell-offs in crypto markets. The very idea of digital gold might lose its luster if the digital realm itself is compromised, or if the focus shifts entirely to physical survival. Thus, while Bitcoin might offer theoretical advantages in certain crisis situations, a full-blown global conflict poses existential threats to its usability and perceived value. The dream of a decentralized financial haven could collide with the harsh realities of a world tearing itself apart, where connectivity and trust evaporate. Section 7. The Double-Edged Sword. Bitcoin's role in times of turmoil. Bitcoin's role in times of crisis, such as the escalating conflict in Ukraine, is often described as a double-edged sword. On one side, it offers potential benefits as a tool for financial resilience and freedom. For individuals in conflict zones or under oppressive regimes, Bitcoin can provide a means to protect their savings from hyperinflation, government seizure, or the collapse of local banking systems. Its borderless nature allows for the relatively easy transfer of value across international lines, which can be crucial for refugees or for sending aid to affected areas. In this sense, Bitcoin can be an empowering technology, offering a lifeline when traditional systems fail. However, the other edge of the sword reveals potential downsides and risks. The same characteristics that make Bitcoin attractive for legitimate users, its pseudonymity and decentralization, can also be exploited by illicit actors. There are concerns that cryptocurrencies could be used to evade sanctions, finance terrorism, or launder money, especially during times of widespread chaos and weakened oversight. While blockchain analysis tools are becoming more sophisticated, the perception that cryptocurrencies facilitate illicit activities can lead to calls for stricter regulation or outright bans, particularly when national security concerns are heightened during wartime. This complicates the narrative of Bitcoin as a purely benevolent force. Moreover, the reliance on Bitcoin as a primary financial tool during a crisis is not without its practical challenges. As mentioned earlier, access to the internet and electricity is a prerequisite. Digital literacy and access to appropriate devices, smartphones or computers, are also necessary. In many crisis-stricken areas, these resources may be scarce or unreliable. The volatility of Bitcoin's price also presents a risk for those who depend on it for essential needs. A sudden drop in value could be devastating for individuals who have converted their life savings into cryptocurrency. The learning curve for using Bitcoin securely can also be steep for newcomers. Therefore, while Bitcoin offers a novel alternative to traditional finance, Its utility in a crisis is highly contextual and depends on a variety of factors. It is not a panacea. It can be a tool for empowerment for some, yet it can also be associated with risks and potential misuse. The ongoing conflict and the fears of its escalation highlight this complex duality. As nations grapple with the realities of modern warfare, including its financial dimensions, the debate over the role and regulation of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin will undoubtedly continue, shaped by their perceived benefits and drawbacks in a world facing profound instability. Section 8. A Glimmer of Hope, the Istanbul Peace Talks. Amidst the escalating military actions and the growing fears of a wider war, a fragile glimmer of hope emerged from the diplomatic front. News reports indicated that Ukraine would be sending a delegation to Istanbul, Turkey, for a new round of direct peace talks with Russia. This development, occurring even as drones and missiles flew, underscores the persistent, if often difficult search for a non-military resolution to the conflict. Such talks represent a crucial alternative to continued bloodshed, and the ever-present risk of further escalation that could engulf more nations. The willingness of both sides to engage in dialogue, however tentative, is a significant step. The reported agenda for these Istanbul meetings offers some insight into the potential pathways to de-escalation. Ukrainian negotiators were said to be planning to present a roadmap for a long-term peace settlement. This roadmap purportedly includes key elements such as a 30-day ceasefire, which would provide immediate relief and create space for further negotiations. Other critical points mentioned were the mutual return of prisoners of war and the repatriation of Ukrainian children who had been taken to Russian-controlled territory. Addressing these humanitarian issues is often a vital component of building trust and momentum in peace processes. The prospect of a high-level meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin, potentially following these initial talks, adds another layer of significance. Direct engagement between the top leaders is often essential to break deadlocks and make the difficult compromises necessary for lasting peace. President Zelensky confirmed that his defense minister, Rustem Umerov, would lead the Ukrainian delegation, stating his commitment to protecting Ukraine's independence and people. Such statements reinforce the seriousness with which Ukraine is approaching these diplomatic efforts, even while maintaining a strong defense. These Istanbul meetings are widely seen as a rare and important opportunity for diplomacy to prevail. The outcome of these talks, though uncertain, will undoubtedly have a significant impact not only on the future of Ukraine and Russia, but also on global stability, and by extension on financial systems and assets like Bitcoin. A breakthrough towards peace could alleviate the fears driving market volatility and the war premium in various commodities. Conversely, a failure of these talks could reinforce pessimistic outlooks and potentially accelerate the negative trends associated with prolonged conflict. The world watches, hoping that dialogue can find a way where weapons have not. Section 9. Navigating the uncharted investor sentiment and Bitcoin's future. The current global situation, marked by events like the Ukrainian drone strike and the persistent threat of wider conflict, places investors and ordinary citizens alike in uncharted territory. Global investor sentiment is a delicate and often fickle thing, heavily influenced by perceptions of risk and opportunity. The escalating conflict in Eastern Europe is a major source of uncertainty, prompting a widespread reconsideration of risk exposure across all asset classes, from traditional stocks and bonds to newer digital assets like Bitcoin. The key question on many minds is how to preserve wealth and navigate the economic storms that war inevitably brings. Bitcoin's future in this volatile environment remains a subject of intense speculation and debate. As we have seen, it presents a dual nature, a potential hedge against inflation and centralized system failures, yet also an asset vulnerable to infrastructural disruptions and panic-driven sell-offs in a major crisis. The Newsweek report aptly summarized this dichotomy, stating that Bitcoin could either rally due to a global flight from fiat currencies or crash if liquidity dries up and risk-off sentiment dominates. Its performance will likely depend on the specific trajectory of the conflict and the broader global response. The outcome of diplomatic efforts such as the Istanbul peace talks will be a critical factor. A successful peace settlement could lead to a significant reduction in geopolitical risk, potentially dampening the safe haven demand for Bitcoin that arises from conflict, but also fostering a more stable global economic environment conducive to investment in innovative technologies. Conversely, a failure of diplomacy and further escalation of the war would likely amplify the anxieties that drive some towards Bitcoin, while simultaneously increasing the systemic risks that could undermine its usability and value in the long term. Ultimately, individuals and institutions must make their own assessments. The path forward is fraught with unknowns. The interplay between ancient patterns of human conflict and new technologies like Bitcoin creates a complex dynamic. Understanding the potential impacts, both positive and negative, requires careful analysis and a clear-eyed view of the risks involved. The events of 2025, particularly the situation in Ukraine, serve as a stark reminder that peace is fragile and that the established global order can be challenged in profound ways, with significant consequences for how we store value and conduct our economic lives.